Good evening, Doug. How are you doing tonight?
Travis, I'm doing super. Thank you.
Well, that's good to hear. As you know, I attended the meeting with Dr. Judkins on Monday, and this resolution number 8 came up, which we have on the screen here. And I think to 99.9% of the people in the town of Queensbury, you could read through this thing 10 times and have no idea what's going on. And I think that 99.9% included the four council people up there as well, as we found out. But yeah, so at any rate, these resolutions are read by the clerk, and then John Stroud generally goes ahead and takes a minute or two to generally tell you what this whole thing is about. Well, in this case, all he did was read it exactly the way that the clerk had read it seconds before. So it was totally unintelligible for virtually everybody. But I then got up there and told them, I said this exactly this. While it hasn't been explained to you as such, tonight you are really being asked to not return part of an excess levy, tax levy, to the taxpayers. Last year, you increased the tax levy by 59%, which generated an additional $1.3 million. Tonight, you're being asked to take $2 million out of the fund that should be going back to the taxpayers and put it someplace else.
And to hide it. And to try to hide it.
It's a shell game.
Yeah.
And they've been doing this for years, many years.
And they're good at it. They're very good at it.
They've got it down to a science. You know, as long as they have nobody on the board that understands this.
And as long as the media doesn't say anything,
and as long as
they don't even have enough money to send reporters to.
Right. The fourth estate in this area is gone. You know, there is no fourth estate. So at any rate, they moved it into a capital reserve. And I knew this was coming because they've done it in a previous year. So I asked for their multi-year capital plan. Do you have any plans to spend this? And they came back with this very simple explanation that no, there is no capital plan.
Okay, so let's stop right there for a second.
All right.
They've got X amount of millions, approximately 6 million in what they call the general fund. Now they can only have 3 months or 25%, according to their own policies in that fund. So when all these millions of additional dollars through over-taxation, through phenomenal sales tax revenue coming into the town coffers happens, they then got to say, okay, we got millions too many. Now you can either give it back to the residents, which makes sense in my opinion and your opinion, or you can try to hide it and put it in other funds called the Capital Reserve Fund. Correct, Mr. Whitehead?
Well, yeah, the evidence I have is that there's probably over $10 million in there as we talk, and they have to get it down this year. In the past years, they had to get it down to a little over 4 million, but in this year, they can get it down to about 6 million because they've raised their expectations of how much money they're going to spend, as you pointed out, 28% in the last 2 years. So as the expenses go up, their allowed reserves go up. So, but they still have millions.
Reserves can go up. Okay.
Yes. Yep. So they still have millions in excess that they have to get rid of. They got rid of 1.5. First of all, they went ahead and that 59% tax increase generated $1.3 million. Okay.
New dollars,
new dollars, plus they underestimated again the sales tax and overestimated what their expenses would be. So they probably have $4 or $5 million that they need to get rid of. They got rid of 1.5 million in May of this year and another 2 million Monday night. So they're going to say they're close to their target and they're good. And they say that every year. But then every year, the auditor, and when I'm talking about the auditor, I'm talking about the town auditor that we pay. We have to go ahead and get it audited every year, as opposed to the controller who's never audited us as far as we know. That town auditor has been saying for the last 8 years that I've looked at it, and I haven't looked at it before that they have consistently had more money in that rainy day fund than they're allowed. Their
Right.
latest one was they had, instead of the 25% they're allowed, they had 49%.
Right.
Double.
So let's just recap a little bit. So again, for people watching this video, the town's allowed to keep 25% in the general fund.
That's
Okay?
25% of their estimated expenses for the next year.
Correct.
Yep.
Okay. They have way too many dollars in that fund. And so they have to move millions out of that and find someplace else to hide it. And still have more than enough money to fund Queensbury's town government and have in reserve. So they go and put millions into this capital reserve, and that's fine. So Mr. Whitehead says,
it'd be
okay,
fine if they had a reason to do it.
yes, Mr. Whitehead foils the town and asks them, well, what's your game plan on all these millions in this other new capital reserve fund? How are you going to spend it? What's your comprehensive plan? And their response was, we don't have one. So does everybody at home understand that? They're siphoning off millions from the general fund over to this new capital, well, it's not new, this capital reserve fund with absolutely no plan on how to spend it.
Nope.
And instead of giving it back to every neighbor in Queensbury, because they're overtaxing the hell out of us, and to do the responsible and the correct thing is giving the money back. They never ever should have increased the taxes 59% last year. They were already overfunded way too much, too many dollars. But instead of giving the money back, they said, okay, let's continue to find places where we can hide it. So go ahead, I'm sorry.
That's fine. So, you ask whether anyone can understand, why they would do that or how they could do that. Well, I do understand, because why do you need a plan on how to spend $1 million here or $1 million there when you have over $28 million in the bank? You don't really need a plan. And, their own submissions to the controller, which they have to make, shows that in their bank accounts ready to draw out tomorrow, they have like $28 million. So it's way overfunded. It's no stress whatsoever, which is the only thing the controller does make a point to say about every government entity in the state of New York. Where are you under stress? If hey, we don't want to be under stress, but they're saying on a scale of 0 to 100, your stress is 0.
Yeah.
Zero stress is not
is not good.
No.
People think John Stroud and Harrison and all the board members think, hey, look at us, we're doing a great job, there's no stress. It's because they've overtaxed the hell out of us. Wake up, Queensbury. They're poor budget planning. They underestimate the sales tax revenue coming in, and so they have millions and millions of dollars. And yet this board had the audacity to increase taxes, your town tax rate 59%. That is absolutely arrogant, it's greed, and it's irresponsible. And that's what got me to decide to get off the county board and to go up to that town board and start telling the truth and laying out the facts. So go ahead, Travis, I'm sorry.
So after I spoke, Dr. Judkins got up there and spoke for his 3 minutes. And he focused more on what this is doing, what this policy is doing to the average resident. And he didn't say that he was an average resident. He says, look, I'm comfortable. I've got plenty of money. People on the board probably have plenty of money. But I know, Doug, that you've had calls from people who have been concerned.
And I had a senior call me crying, wanting to know what I could do to help her. I mean, think about that. A senior citizen has to call me and ask me what I can do to help her. And the reality is, I told her there's not much unless I get on the town board. And I'll stop that insanity just like you will. I'll stop the clear and abusive overtaxation and overspending. And I told her I'd run for the second ward. That's the best I could promise her. And that's why I'm running. And I'm sure that's why you're running. So
it is.
Yeah.
And, and I can't promise you that the board, you're one vote out of five, I'd be one vote out of five. I can't promise you that we can change it, but what I will promise you is that before we vote on something, like they voted on this $2 million the other night, every other member of the board is going to understand what they're voting for.
And right now they don't. Yeah,
Right now they don't, and
right now
now
the
I have.
vote, they vote on issues. They don't have a clear-cut understanding of the budget. I remember I called Mr. McNulty 2 years ago, a year ago, and before the budget and so forth. I said, Tim, can we sit down and talk with Mr. Whitehead, myself, and you, and go over the budget? And he clearly said no. He did not want to. He does not want to learn. He didn't want to learn about the budget, in my opinion, which was very sad. And so we make mistakes like this over and over, and we overtax the people. We're in record inflation. We got people fighting to put food on the table. And this town, this board decided that to increase the town tax rate 59%, despite record amounts of dollars in the town coffers. It's unconscionable what they did. And so this has got to stop. This spending abuse, overtaxation abuse has to stop. And if nothing else, if I'm on the board, I know I'm one of five, but there'll be very clear dialogue on what's going on, not just people following along and not knowing how to read a budget and understand a budget.
So after I had my 3 minute allowance and Dr. Judkins had his 3 minute allowance, we got actually, which is kind of unusual, we had two of the five people up there actually respond to things that we had said. Harrison Freer said that, and this is an exact quote, while there are some isolated voices that think that the board has raised taxes too much, I totally disagree. And he went on to saying he thinks this is a low tax rate.
Yeah, imagine that. So we got Mr. Freer, who I'm sure is well off. He lives out of one of the nicest homes, nicest streets in Queensbury. He's well off. So increasing the taxes, the town tax rate, an additional $200 for a home, and is nothing to him.
Well,
but it is the people trying to make it day after day after day. I find that very insulting.
Well, it is a relatively low tax rate compared to Long Island or even Albany or anything. What I don't know if he understands is that Warren County is very different in that Warren County has decided, as opposed to many other counties, to share the sales tax that they have every right to keep for themselves, to share half of it with all the towns. And because of that, our town never had any town tax whatsoever. Zero is a pretty low. I would agree that zero is a pretty low tax.
Yeah.
Okay,
that's what Queensbury used to have. No
zero until 2011 was the first time they've had a tax. There are other Warren County towns right now, Bolton, Hague, I think Lake George, that have zero as well. And we live in Warren County. We have this money coming into the towns. It doesn't mean you can go ahead and take other money on top of that. That tax in 2011 was needed because Dan Steck had run down the accounts, the balances too much. And then, it would have been too much probably, but then 2009 hit and, the recession, and now all of a sudden they were in a tight spot.
Right. When people on the board make comments and statements that, hey, Queensbury's got, the lowest tax rate in Warren County. But that's not quite accurate. As you just pointed out, there's 2 or 3 towns that have zero tax rate. Zero. South Glens Falls just said last week they're reducing their town tax rate 8 or 9%. I mean, so when somebody gets up there, no one pushes back because no one knows the facts. When someone on that board makes distorted and gives out misinformation, people think, well, that's got to be true because so and so said it, but it's not. There are towns without any tax rate in Warren County. Right. So Queensbury doesn't have the lowest. We have one of the lower ones, but not the lowest by any means. And we could be reducing it even further because, again, of the record amount of sales tax dollars coming into the coffers, the fact that we have an excess in our budget every year due to the fact that they underestimate the revenue and they overestimate the expenses, and the fact that our town tax rate was increased 59%. So, you know, this becomes a shell game where to hide all the excess tax money. Where are we going to do it? How are we going to hide it this year?
So I think they're feeling pretty good when they say, well, we're not going to raise the taxes this year. But, you know, they still have the raise from last year. And
yeah, 59%.
3 million is still in there until we get rid of it. Now they
should have given it back. They should have reduced the 59% this year.
They could have very easily. They
Very
could have done
easily
it on Monday.
And still had additional dollars in there in the general fund. So, yes. You know, okay.
Yeah. No, they took, as I said, they took 1.5 million out in May. They took another 2 million out. The least they could have done is take the 1.3 out and given it to us rather than,
giving it back to the taxpayers.
That's not only what they could have done, it's what they should have done according to the laws in the state of New York.
Correct.
So
right, next slide.
Harrison is talking about the fantastic Moody rating that we get for for borrowing money. Well, of course, when you don't need to borrow money, when you have money coming out, it's going to be an easy call for a bank to lend you money. Right. So again, all that says is that you have no stress.
And so Queensberry's board, they feel very good. We've got a ton of money and we've got no stress. Ask any of the auditors, ask any of the banks. That's entirely correct.
That is correct.
But the people paying the bills, they have a lot of stress, Travis. The senior who called me crying, the families who tell me that they're struggling to put food on the table because the record inflation and over-taxation. So yeah, that's stress out there, Mr. Freer and Mr. Stroud and Mr. McNulty and Mr. Ferrone and Mr. Medivere. There's stress out there. It's not in Queensberry. It's on the residents paying the bills. So get a grip on reality here. For crying out loud, do the right thing. Reduce the town tax rate significantly. Do the right thing for once. Now we're bringing light to this, and now they're all worried. Oh my God, people are starting to talk about this. Yeah, we're talking about it because you're abusing the residents and their wallets, and you're making your little town fat and happy, and the auditors love it, but the people paying the bills don't.
So we get a second chance after they take the votes there to talk for 4 minutes this time. And there was a little bit of give and take at this point with Mr. Freer and Mr. McNulty. So Harrison acknowledged that he understands that, what he had said before just indicates that they're in, a stress-free situation. But then he said, because we keep on talking about this 25% versus the 49%, et cetera. And he says, where did you get that 25% from? That's why I'm shaking my head. Of course, that question shouldn't be asked after you've just voted for $2 million. That question should have been asked before you voted, right? But I explained that to him saying, well, what you see is the policy says 3 months, right? He says, yeah, it's 3 months. It's not 25%. I said, what is 3 months of a year? Isn't that a quarter? Isn't a quarter 25%?
That was a tough question for some of the board.
Yeah. So he acknowledged that, okay. But then Mr. McNulty, I think, took the cake when he says, I'm getting sick of this. You saying that the reason I voted for that budget, and we're talking about 59%. That's all we're ever talked about, Doug. He said it increased our capability for ambulances. And, I said, whoa. I said, in that budget, there are many different taxing sources. One of them is the 59% property tax that I'm talking about. Another one is the EMS tax levy.
Which
that went up 129%. And you can't mix those. I can't use a penny of the property tax to pay for ambulances.
And vice versa.
So, I mean, if you or I are on the budget and we disagreed with one and agreed with the other. I mean, that's what we talk about when we talk about, you say, as long as you keep that 59% in there, I can't vote for the budget. And you negotiate, and you say, this is my problem. I don't have a problem with the 129. I don't have a problem with the ambulances. I understand the state of New York is making it more difficult for EMS people to think of this as a hobby. With certification and training and all this other stuff that's required, it's become a job, and we're going to have to pay them. And I understand that, and we should pay them. So, I pay my taxes. I just don't think that I should be paying more than I should. But they don't really get it.
And let me just repeat that just briefly. The town tax rate is entirely separate from the EMS tax. And if you look on your tax bill, you'll see that. You'll see a county tax, you'll see a town tax rate, tax and a rate. You'll see the 59%, and you'll see the EMS line, which is entirely separate. So when any board member tries to say, well, I'm saving lives because I voted for, to increase the tax rate. Well, the town tax rate is, again, entirely separate. And we support the EMS increase and increase in taxes and increase in funding. We support that. We're not talking about that. So don't let anybody on that board try to mislead you or distort or confuse you, because it's just shameful if they do.
And I want to end this with a quote from Mark Twain. It's easier to fool people than to convince them they've been fooled.
Bingo.
And, that's what we're seeing on this board. They've taken a stand, and they're not about to admit that they've been fooled.
All they got to do is say, hey, I didn't understand it. I shouldn't have voted for that. I shouldn't have overtaxed the people in Queensbury fighting to survive. I shouldn't have done it. And I'm going to give it back. Instead, they double down, they distort, they mislead, and then they expect people to buy it because there's no media, there's no coverage to report the facts and the truth. And that's what's really concerning to me and scary to me. So I'll do my best. You'll do your best. We'll try to bring some common sense, some sanity to that board, because right now this taxation is, in my opinion, and insane may be too big of a word, but it's definitely out of line and it's not needed, and we've proven it with the facts and the data.
Amen to that.
Okay.
Thank you, Doug. And we'll have to do another. Well, I actually hope we don't have to do another one.
I hope we don't either. I think we've done 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And I hope people are at least looking at them and becoming educated.
I hope so too.
I got no dog in this fight, and you don't either, other than we're trying to do the right thing for the people of Queensbury. So,
well, that's what every elected official is told that they need to do. They're working for the people that elected them. And, they're not trying to make their jobs easier, their jobs stress-free. No, they're supposed to manage the taxpayers' money. And if you don't want to do that, then you probably shouldn't be running. And I know I'm running because I think that it should be managed better. And I know you feel the same way.
Exactly.
So
I know it can be. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. You have a great evening, Mr. Whitehead. I appreciate you having me on.
Okay. You too.
Thanks.